For those who haven't met you, my name is Regina Scavens, and I'm in Development Studies at Te Kuninga ki Pukeahu, Massey University, and really proud to be involved with bringing this event together today because it's so awesome being able to dialogue on issues about how we can do things more sustainably, enhance people's well-being, and learn from Indigenous wisdom as we're doing so. So lovely to be here with you all, and many thanks to our speakers. So first up, we're going to have up to 15 minutes from each of these four people, one after the other. And following that, you go into workshop sessions, and you will basically be able to workshop 2 of the 4 topics. I'll explain about that at the end, but so as you start having questions and start mulling over ideas, you will have a chance to talk about them some more at the end of this. So first up, we're very lucky to have Sally Hett from the Aotearoa Wellbeing Economies Alliance stepping in for Joanne Waitoa, who wasn't able to make it. She is on the program, but Sally is joining us. She is the Knowledge and Engagement Lead, and Sally's worked primarily in social policy research since university. She's led research activity at the McGuinness Institute, been an advisor to the Mental Health and Addiction Inquiry, run GovTech initiatives at Creative HQ, and she had a previous role working on Māori data sovereignty kaupapa at Nicholson Consulting. Perhaps even more importantly, she's also a dance instructor for Shut Up and Dance, which is a great, especially, well, it grew out of Wellington and it's spread further, hasn't it, initiative. So if we need an energiser activity this afternoon, let me know, or let Sally know, and we'll get that going. So warm welcome, please, for Sally.
Well, kia ora koutou. Nā mihi ki ngā mana whenua o te rohi nei, te Aotearoa Ngāti Tō Rangatira e Taranaki Whānui. Nā mihi nunui ki Kingitu Heitia, haere atu rā. Nā mihi ki ngā kai kōrero o tēnei rā. Mahana Jury, Jason Mika, Huhana Smith, nā mihi ki a koutou, e nā kai kōrero I muri iho aho. Kia ora, ko tangata tiriti te iwi, no ingarangi ko te rana I Italia o ku tupuna I tupuaki o ki Poneke, e noho anō ki Paikakariki e Naenei, ko Sally toko ingoa, tēnā koutou. Wow, it's amazing to be here. I'm short as it is, and then I have to take my shoes off. I feel like you can't see me over the mic. But as was mentioned, I'm filling in for Jo Waitoa, who is on the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Aotearoa board. And so I'm a last-minute ring-in, so please excuse while I look at my notes quite a bit, because I did jot down what I wanted to talk through so that I didn't ramble too much. And so, yeah, as Regina said, I'm the Knowledge and Engagement Lead at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Aotearoa. And, yeah, so here to talk about the economy. Everyone's, all these smiles, everyone's favourite topic. As the economist Ha-Joon Chung says, the economy is too important to leave to the economists. So it's all of us, and this movement and change is going to take us all. And so We All Aotearoa is an economy in service of life. So decentering money and profit from the economy to one that centres things that we care about, like care and community, te taiao, creativity, our non-material needs. For this presentation, I kind of wanted to explain how I'm standing here through kind of 2 aha moments I've had over my sort of recent-ish life to kind of centre 2 themes. One around economics and the economy, and the other around the colonial history of Aotearoa and how Māoridom should and can lead a sustainable economy in Aotearoa and the need for constitutional change. All right, so kind of economics. I had a really kind of privileged Pākehā upbringing in Poneke, and I never questioned like the systems and the structures and my role in them that I'm brought up with. At the time, the economy was taken as a given. There are no alternatives, was what we were told. So kind of grew up with that mindset of growth, and that growth paradigm. I then studied economics and politics at the University of Otago, and I was kind of confused as to how something we might cover in one wasn't then discussed in the other, yet they were kind of talking about the same thing, and they are so intricately linked that they shouldn't be separate like that, and that the economy is designed largely here by politicians. So yeah, I really think about it always as the political economy, or political economies, as Kelly Dombrowski talks about. Ngā mihi, Kelly. And then while studying in the States, there was actually sort of the kōrero and whakaro from Tim Jackson that was like a massive mic drop moment for me. And I wanted to share, it was this sentiment, and he was saying that we spend money we don't have on things we don't need to make impressions that won't last on people we don't care about. Mic drop. I was like, what? What are we doing? And that kind of led to that critique of our consumerist culture. And I was studying sort of like corporate personhood and the Citizens United FEC Supreme Court case in America with money and politics, etc. Dumb stuff. And then back in Aotearoa, I've been working more in social policy research and reading as much as I could. Very much a kind of internal quiet revolution to like a completely changed mindset. So exploring things like degrowth and community wealth building, permaculture, trying to get my head around MMT, modern monetary theory, still trying, when I joined the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And I'll talk more about the Alliance later, I think, but this economy, so a finite planet and endless growth, something's got to give. And I don't think this view is kind of like controversial, complex, or radical. It just seems straightforward to me that we can't endlessly grow on a finite planet. Indigenous peoples have always known this, and we're just catching up. Yes, and this links me to the SDG number 8. Number 8 is decent work and economic growth. And I think that that is a kind of massive failing that we still had growth as a global imperative in the SDGs. And that kind of, how, like as Jason was saying, how do you balance them? So far, growth has kind of superseded the others in being our global priority. So this traditional way of seeing the economy with like social, environmental, and economic as being separate is obviously outdated and wrong and not serving us. Environmental destruction's just kind of an externality to put on a graph over on the side. The economy is kind of part of nature and society. And I have it here. We All Global estimates that 75% of S&P 500 companies would be bankrupt if they had to pay for the true cost of their environmental externalities. And more we are understanding that inequality, poverty, environmental destruction are symptoms of our economic system. They are the logical outcomes of how it's currently designed. That's bad design, hey? And in Aotearoa, we kind of largely got the system we currently have through that time of financial crisis that led to 84 and neoliberalism and the Roger Douglas reforms, which saw that mass privatisation and deregulation and free market capitalism kind of take over. And yeah, Aotearoa went from being one of the most regulated economies to the least in the OECD. And where does that leave us now? So Aotearoa is currently exceeding 6 of 9 planetary boundaries. WWF say that if everyone on Earth consumed like we do, we would need between 4 and 7 Earths to maintain our resource consumption. The poorest half of New Zealanders own only 2% of the wealth. And our trustee Joe Waitoa would remind us that, and as Jason and Huhana spoke to as well, that Māori inequality didn't start in 84, it started with the Crown undermining the political and economic structures that were already in place and the deposition and theft of land in the 19th, 20th century. Another 2024 Ipsos poll in New Zealand showed that 2/3 of the country think that New Zealand's economy is rigged to advantage the rich and powerful. So, yeah, people aren't stoked. And that story, oh yes, the story of growth and that trickle down will happen and we'll all be better off is not the case. It's not happened. Between 1984 and 2004, we became 50% richer by GDP, but we have not seen that beneficial relationship with child poverty rates, which have doubled over that period. So the system was designed, and we can redesign it. And it's being redesigned already, and there's lots of leadership happening in this space. And I'll just sort of share some examples, speaking here to a sustainable economy. We talk about an economy with people and planet in the centre. Donut economics is an example, that way of visualising and measuring our relationship with the natural world, where the purpose is to live in that safe space between the social floor and the planetary boundaries. Like I said, Tim Jackson's work with prosperity without growth, Herman Daly's work on ecological economics dating back to the 80s. There's the huge movement of the zero waste movement in Aotearoa, and it actually started here in Kaitaia in the 80s with the first resource recovery centre, community resource recovery centre. I think just the history of that movement is so powerful that we don't really know it, and how it's intricately linked with circular economies, and those two kaupapa. We need all business to be circular. And movements like B Corp and other business certifications are kind of on their way to getting us somewhere. The Social Enterprise World Forum have their People and Planet First verification, and the Economy for Common Good is another model. And yeah, I'm really stoked on like the shared economy. I'm massive into like just slowing down, less is more kind of philosophy, and like the shared economy and the repair network Aotearoa I think is really massive, with repair cafes across the country. Lots is being done, but we still need heaps more to happen. And just kind of an example, so like Treasury is forecasting up to 23 billion to purchase offshore carbon credits to meet the Paris commitments. But what could we do that's more beneficial with that 23 million on long-term mitigation? And then we don't need to go into the current government fast-track mining, etc. Lots more to do. And now I just kind of wanted to touch more on my sort of second aha moment, which is kind of around what it means to belong in Aotearoa. Found myself as an advisor on the Mental Health and Addiction Inquiry, so ki te taha o tā Mason jury, which was such a privilege. Wasn't on the panel, I was the advisor, basically the note taker, and we travelled around for 3 months, talking with people for about 8 hours a day on the ways in which we're failing so many people across Aotearoa. The kind of institutional racism, the failing justice system, that the Western medical model is the only one provided, that suicide rates have almost reached a tipping point. A deep dive in the symptoms of our kind of colonial reality in Aotearoa. And this inequality is absolutely sickening and not inevitable at all. So my love of political economy was kind of shattered and remade around this need for constitutional change in tino rangatiratanga. And acknowledging that I'm extremely late to this party, and there is so much deep thinking that has gone on, and love and leadership in this space. But I see, and Jason spoke to this morning, but Te Tiriti o Waitangi is like the korua of care for Pākehā and Tauiwi in Aotearoa, and a movement for a wellbeing economy is a movement for Te Tiriti justice and working towards tino rangatiratanga for whānau hapu and iwi. It's that combination of domestic law and the international law with he whakaputanga and tikanga that should ensure that mana whenua can exercise tino rangatiratanga. And just kind of highlighting Matiki Mai, that kind of working group. I must have typed a lot more than I thought. Matiki Mai's awesome constitutional transformation mahi, go have a look. You probably already know about it. So this economy or economies based on manaakitanga, whanaungatanga, kaitiakitanga can ensure that everyone lives well, connected to communities and within planetary boundaries. The work of Matthew Scobie, Kaitahu from the University of Canterbury, and Anna Sturman, and their new Pukeahu, The Economic Possibilities of Decolonisation. It's epic. It's actually our upcoming Wellbeing Economy book club on the 17th of September, if anyone wants to join that kōrero. But yeah, maps some of this whakaaro beautifully. Some other examples of that Māori economy's leadership. We've talked about kind of the Wanganui River and Te Urewera and personhood. MB's report on the Tūhoi economic worldview, showing that nature can't be traded off its intrinsic and that we can't discount future and future generations. He ora waiora that we talked to this morning. And also that donut that I mentioned earlier. Taina Bossadine has done the Indigenous version where the environment is the kind of the social relationship to whenua is the floor on which our other relationships are a part of. I've got food sovereignty mahi here, the Parakore movement, the toa economy at Ngāti Toa Rangatira, with their whenua reacquisition, and they've got community housing trusts and social procurement and climate citizens assembly. There's so much good stuff going on there that aligns to our work around community wealth building as a local economic development model. So heaps going on, and maybe I'll just end touching a bit on the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and what that is. So it's an international alliance that was formed in 2018, where leaders of these kind of new economy schools came together, seeing that was more that united them than was different, and we needed to come together to really build a movement. And this is things like donut economics and circular and regen and solidarity and feminist, etc. And that the wellbeing economy is kind of an umbrella for all those different schools of new economic thinking. 19 hubs in different countries, obviously one being here, and we are working around sort of new knowledge, new narratives, new connections, or like growing connections in this movement. We've got heaps of our projects and resources and events and things are on our website, so maybe have a look, or we can talk about it in a group later. But systems change has happened before, and we've got to all do it. And we've got to be ready for when there's that moment. If it's like a political rupture, I'm not sure that we've got what's needed for this new economy. And just coming back to the SDGs around the kind of grappling with those contradictions within them and the need for balance that Jason talked about. And what might we do? I think they're till 2030, hey? So what might we design up and ensure is embedded in the next iteration, be it being local and Indigenous views. Cool. All right. Ngā mihi, kia koutou.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Sally. Lots of food for thought there and positive stuff on thinking differently about economies. So like I said, there'll be a chance to talk about some more of these ideas on different ways of thinking economies afterwards, after this 4 speakers in the workshop space. So it's my pleasure now to welcome, it's Kirsty, isn't it, next? Is that right on the list? Yes. Right, it's Kirsty. It's Dr. Kirsty Wild, who has her PhD from Massey University in Development Studies, which is awesome. And she's an environmental sociologist and public health researcher. She's interested in the people dimensions of environmental challenges and environmental joys as well. So let's not just look at the challenges, let's look at the joys, let's look at how we can move forward in joyful ways. She's currently a Senior Research Fellow in Environmental Health at Waipapa Taumata Rau, University of Auckland, where she does research on how we can create happy, healthy cities in Aotearoa. She was inspired to attend the summit because she likes the holism that taking an SDG approach brings to urban health. So, welcome Kirsty to the stand.
I don't know if that's working, is it?
Has it gone to sleep?
It might have.
It's all right, here we go.
Kia ora koutou everyone, ko Kirsty Wild tōku ingoa. It is, I'll just let you do your thing there. It's so lovely to be here today. As Regina said, I am a Massey grad. I did all my degrees at Massey, and I lived in Palmy for 12 years, so this is also a little bit of a Massey reunion for me. Yes, I work a lot on transport these days, and it was Palmy that inspired that, got me into cycling. And then when I went back to Tamaki Makaurau, I was like, oh. And I built my own e-bike before that was a huge thing. And that's what got me a job in public health, actually, working on e-bike projects, including, yes, for the recording. Yes, good. I've worked a lot on bike projects, including in South Auckland, all bits of Auckland. And more recently, I've branched out a little bit. I did our first piece of research for our transport agency on transport and mental health in Aotearoa, and was very grateful to get to do some work for the WHO recently too on co-benefits, like benefits for health equity and climate action around transport globally to contribute to the global report on social determinants of health equity. So I'm going to talk about the potential for a regenerative transport system. So in the sense of a transport system that doesn't just protect te taio, but creates opportunities for improving well-being and improving equity, if we're still allowed to talk about that, maybe, in Aotearoa. And it's just been so interesting. I'm sure it's the same for everyone thinking about this question of let's ask nature. So I've got a few thoughts on that, but in my workshop, I want to open it up to you guys. What do you think? So transport and the SDGs and well-being, sometimes people find it a bit of a dry topic, but not me, obviously. It's absolutely, movement is absolutely the foundation of well-being. Like, most of us need to move to meet our basic needs, to access food and income, education, healthcare, also the foundation of really important sort of survival and democratic needs like assembling, escaping, voting. Yeah, so it's really, really important in terms of everyone's potential to meet their basic needs in Aotearoa and globally. It's also the most important opportunity for us to move our bodies. We still have a lot of our tamariki in particular who go into school each day. About 40% of them are still getting to school, walking and biking. It's shrinking for everyone, these opportunities, but it's the most important opportunity to build movement into our daily lives. We also have quite a lot of challenges. So our current transport system, we overtook the US. Are you pointing at something? No. We overtook the US in about 2020 as the most car-dominated country in the world. So that presents a lot of challenges. It's a really expensive transport system. About a third of people don't drive because they're too young, they're too old, they don't have enough money. So there's a lot of transport-related social exclusion, economic exclusion in Aotearoa. It's about nearly a quarter of our emissions, and the source of emissions that's still rising, and rising the fastest. It's also very polluting in general. About 1 in 10 deaths in Aotearoa, early deaths, are a result of air pollution, mostly from cars. We had new research out about that in Tamaki Makaurau, where I'm from. 90% of the city exceeds WHO guidelines for air quality. Pretty sedentary, as I've pointed out, and also we have about 3,000, I've got lots of statistics, don't I? 3,000, we have about 300 people who die each year on our roads, but probably another 3,000 people who have life-changing injuries. So transport has a similar burden of disease to tobacco and obesity in Aotearoa, mainly from air pollution and inactivity, and it's responsible for about 5% of the life expectancy difference between Māori and non-Māori as a result. So yeah, when people talk about transport and the SDGs, they often go for number 11, sustainable cities. But I think, as I've already mentioned, it touches on so many of these. Close to my heart is poverty, and transport poverty in particular. We still don't measure it. Our transport agencies have never done a single piece of research on it. But we know that in the lowest income quintile, that people are spending about 30% of their income on transport. And energy poverty is considered to be about 10% of your income. So a lot of so-called foregone mobility, people not having opportunity at all. Obviously health, hauora, I've talked about that a lot. It really is a significant health issue for us in Aotearoa, as well as access to economic opportunities, education, our air, our water, gender equality, also important to me. In almost all cultures, women have less opportunities for movement, and that has an impact on us in terms of our opportunities, economic opportunities and education, but also even our bodies. Opportunities for physical activity are much reduced for most women as a result. So yeah, it's not that dry after all, transport. So it was super interesting, as I say, to think about. I read all sorts of stuff, including this book called How to Think Like a Tree. I was trying to think about, like, let's ask nature, what are the principles? I think, how can we move away from the monoculture that we've got? How can we make a better case for the importance, the value of a bit more of a polyculture? I think would be one principle that stands out straight away. From my Think Like a Tree book, it just had so many examples of how trees look after each other. One that really stood out for me that I hadn't read before was the idea that when the spring comes with deciduous trees, I know in Aotearoa we don't have many deciduous trees, but we have imports. When the spring comes, the small trees get a chance to go first to open their leaves, because soon they're going to be shaded by all the big trees, and they're not going to get much light. So I just think, how can we, given there's so many people who are without mobility resources, there's so many people who miss out at the moment, how can we share our resources a bit more? So interdependence and sharing is another important thing I think that we can learn from nature and think about how we apply that to transport. And related to that is care. Top of mind for me as a transport researcher is that we are probably about to make a decision to put our speeds up. Probably the first country in the world to do that around our schools, where we've still got 40% of our tamariki walking and biking to school. We also don't really think about or plan for people with care responsibilities. Mostly we plan for people to drive trucks and people who commute by themselves to work. So I've done quite a lot of research with and the research that I've been part of, women, Māori communities, Pacific communities in particular, talk about that desire to and the need to travel with others, who have more complex transport routines that involve care. So how can we build care in as a central organising principle of our transport system? Nature is seasonal. We're not in an amazing season for transport at the moment. With our new transport policy statement, that's removed a lot of these things. But the thing about seasons is that they change, and there will be opportunities again to think about what sort of transport system we want. So that's what, and I want to hear from you guys about what you think about what nature tells us about creating a regenerative transport system. Thank you. I'll let you talk to me.
Kia ora, Kirsty. Think like a tree. Right, who's the author, if we want to look that one up? With a name like that, we won't forget it though. So that's fantastic. We've got Nick up next. Excuse me. So I'm delighted now to introduce Nick Hoskins. So we've got someone who's representing an industry speaking to us next. So obviously there's a lot of academics in the room, there's community activists, there's some people from government, there's some people from the private sector, but not that many. And yet, you know, we're trying to understand how we can do economic development more sustainably. So it's really important that we think about these issues as well. So Nick's speaking on a topic close to my heart, viticulture. Great. I think a glass of wine tonight might be appropriate, actually. Nick has over 35 years of experience in viticulture, beginning as a viticulturalist at Martinborough Vineyards, and since the late 90s has worked at Riversun Grapevine Nurseries and Linnaeus Laboratories, offering guidance on vineyard development, grapevine genetics and vine health. He managed vineyard operations in Wairarapa and led research projects for New Zealand wine growers and Bragato Research Institute. He's passionate about reducing chemical inputs. Did anybody think of more viticulture for the Kuku area when we were doing Ohana's exercise this morning? I'm not sure, but reducing chemical inputs. Nick is involved with BioScout, a disease monitoring technology, and serves on the board of New Zealand Plant Producers Incorporated. Very warm welcome to Nick.
Kia ora. Thank you, Regina, and thanks to my daughter Kelly Dombrowski and Regina for getting me to do this talk, roping me in, as it were, and also need to mention my granddaughter Imogen Dombrowski, who's here today as well. Just listening to the previous speakers, this is a bit off track, but I've been walking the Te Rau Trail with my brother, and we've done all the North Island and the top third of the South Island, but we started at Cape Reinga and walked through to the Waikato when we first started. And we walked all the way, carried our own gear and everything, but one of the things I pondered as we were walking along, because there were some sections we had to walk through along motorways and on roads to as part of that trail, and you were just so conscious of the number of cars and trucks passing you by, and wondered what the hell they were all doing and where they were all going. And then we walked into Auckland, and apart from the seeing the changes in economic status from Northland through to the beginning of Auckland, that was really a bit of an eye-opener as well. But when we walked through Auckland, we saw all these acres and acres of distribution centres and car yards and things that we walked through. It was just, I live in the Wairarapa, so not used to all that. It was a real eye-opener to see what's happening with this economy and how it works. So anyway, that's a little bit off track. I'm going to start on what I was here to talk about, which was viticulture. And I'm going to try and relate to you what the viticultural industry is doing regarding sustainable development goals, and mostly they're only doing one, which is number 13, climate action and reducing emissions. So that's how to do viticulture more sustainably. But to do that, I do need to describe where we've come from and some of the challenges that brings. So 30 years ago, the national vineyard was about 6,000 hectares, and now it's 43,000 hectares. So it's a huge change in the area planted. 28,000 hectares of those are in one region, in Marlborough. And viticulture is reasonably intensive in terms of horticulture, but not as intensive as perhaps a kiwi fruit orchard, where in comparison, a vineyard produces about 14 tonnes of fruit per hectare, kiwi fruit orchard maybe 25 tonnes per hectare, but an apple orchard these days anywhere between 50 and 100 tonnes of fruit per hectare. But the kiwi fruit industry is a little bit smaller, about 14,000 hectares, and apples maybe 10,000 hectares. So that gives you a bit of perspective about the impact on the environment. So when I first started in the wine industry in Martinborough, more than 40 years ago now, hardly anyone had any qualifications, and my training was mostly in horticulture and amenity horticulture. In fact, that was here in Wellington, and I went to school over the road here at St Pat's, which is not there anymore. When I first started, we relied on observation, and there were a few old world texts from Europe and France, of course. But we mainly had to learn by trial and error, and I was listening this morning. Perhaps we should have asked the locals, Ngāti Kahungunu, how to do it in the Wairarapa. And it's a bit ironic because I was also teaching horticulture at Hauriki Marae there, and when I think about what was said this morning, why was I teaching that? Why weren't someone else teaching that at that Hauriki Marae in those days? We used extensive cultivation in those days and bare earth policies for frost protection. So that was very hungry on machinery and gas guzzling tractors. We had single row operations, indiscriminate use of herbicides, fungicides and insecticides. Those were the kind of norms 40 years ago. There was, however, less disease pressure in those days, and I often wonder why that was, and perhaps because there was more diversity and more spatial separation of vineyards. And I guess one of my first observations of nature was a disease on grapevines, or an insect on grapevine called red spider mite. Now, it's only a very small insect, and it sucks sap from the leaf and causes bronzing and discoloration on the leaves. And so the conventional wisdom was to spray that with an organophosphate. And so I did that, and I did it for a couple of years, and it didn't get any better. There were more red spider mite. And I thought, well, this is stupid. I've increased the rates, I've had more sprays, and none of it's working. What am I even bothering for? And the damage they were doing to the leaves of the vines wasn't significant. It reduced photosynthetic activity, but it probably didn't affect the end outcome of the fruit. So we stopped. And after about 2 years, we couldn't find them anymore. And so I asked nature, and nature said, "You dummy." What you did was you killed all the natural predators of that insect. And so we created what they now term as a chemically induced outbreak. So that was one of my first experience of that, and since then it's driven a lot of my thinking. And this sort of tells you something about it. In those days, we had to observe and pay attention, but I only had 20 hectares to look after, whereas a vineyard manager, in these days with the 43,000 hectares, a vineyard manager might be looking after thousands of hectares. And so it's a much more difficult task for them to observe nature and ask nature. So today the wine industry is pretty organised, and that bare earth vineyard you can see there on the left is what was in the past, but now much more normal to see something like that on the right with a crop of mustard, and I think you can see another crop growing in an adjacent row of a lower another crop there. I don't know what it's. Flower crop or something, I think, but that's much more common these days. And the industry is much more organised. We have something called Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand, or SWINS, And so all vineyards have to be either SWINS certified, or they can be organically certified by BioGrow. Sustainable wine growing in New Zealand's been around 20 years or more now, and it started as a voluntary scorecard to measure the practices in vineyard. It also just makes sure that when we go to market, it certifies that what's in the bottle is actually what it says. But no winery can buy fruit that's come from a vineyard that isn't sustainably certified, and the growers are audited every 3 years on their practices, and they have to keep records on all those practices, including waste, pest and disease applications, soil, and fertiliser records, and also labour records, and electricity use and diesel use. So most of what I'm talking about is sustainable development and greenhouse gas emissions for climate change. And you can see that there, yeah. So the total emissions for a litre of wine is 472 grams, which is about 350 something a bottle. It's spread between winery and vineyard, so 65% of that is winery and 35% of that is vineyard. So, and of the winery part, 81% of that is packaging, which is glass and cardboard and transport to market. I'm not going to deal with that one because that's too big, but I'm going to talk about the vineyard one, which is, and that 35% of those emissions are 56% diesel and 20% plant protection, and those are the two I'm going to deal with or talk about today. So that's a sort of quick update on where the wine industry is and where it's come from. In the next few minutes, I just want to talk about how we can ask nature and how we can use technology and research to help us. So, as an example, we use testing. Sustainable wine growing New Zealand we're not allowed to apply fertiliser without doing a soil or a leaf test on a vine. So we have to have a reason to apply fertiliser, and I think that's been in place for quite some time. The nitrogen leachate in vineyard we've measured in a research project that I was involved in, and they are fairly low. They're between 5 and 7 kilos of nitrogen leachate per hectare per year in the water. That might seem a lot to you, but by contrast, overwintering dairy cows are something like 60 to 70 kilograms per hectare. So that's an example. Another example that we need to monitor the water we use in the vineyard, and there's lots of ways of measuring how to be more efficient in terms of what the vine needs for water use. And more recently, there's a lot of emphasis on subsurface irrigation, which is a technology that people are using to conserve moisture and, more importantly, to stop growing weeds. I don't know if you can see that very well, but the one on the left has got buried or subsurface irrigation, and the one on the right, it's probably not a very good example, has a lot more weed growth. So the water, and you can see the drip line here as well. And so the water falls on the soil and grows more weeds, and then you've got to use more herbicide or more mowing or something to control those weeds, otherwise they grow up into the fruit. So that's couple of examples of technology already in use. There's a lot of use of weather stations and weather data to predict rainfall, to measure soil moisture, and also to look at disease modelling to try and reduce our sprays. So that unit you can see there is the BioScout unit I'm working with, and we've developed an in-house laboratory basically, so that unit is sucking air through this nozzle here, and it sucks for about 6 hours, and it sticks, everything it sucks onto a clear tape, and then the tape moves in front of a microscope and a camera, and it takes photos of it, sends it to the cloud, where it uses AI, and what did someone call it?
Not ancestral.
Ancestral. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So it uses AI to count and to identify those spores, and it sends it back to the grower on a dashboard like you see here to show the disease levels each day. And below that you can see a risk model which takes the old weather data risk models and adds another layer to it of the number of spores. 2 minutes. Okay, I better hurry up. Also, other technologies are to scan vines down the row with near-infrared cameras, and that's helpful for disease as well. This is a project we did called the Vineyard Ecosystems Project, where we looked at 2 different regimes, one organic and one non-organic. So one using much more herbicides. That's a really terrible spray job, by the way. SWINS would not allow that to pass because it's too wide, and it looks like they sprayed in the wind as well. Anyway, so what did we see when we looked at? We took soil samples from those 2 sites and looked at what happened to the soil microorganisms after applying chemistry and not applying chemistry. What we found, contrary to what we thought we'd find, was completely different. There was not a big difference, which was surprising. And so there were 12 vineyards in all, and 6 of them, actually it was 24 vineyards, 12 in each region, 6 organic and 6 non-organic, if you want to call it. They've called them high input and low input there. And so we DNA sequenced those soils for 3 years and 3 times a year, and they were very extensive sampling, and we could find only minor differences in the taxa, and those things you see here are bacteria, fungi and eukaryotes, which are basically animals and worms, insects and worms. And there was differences in Hawke's Bay, but the differences were bigger by region and by time, by either year or time of year, than they were between those 2 management regimes, which is not really what we wanted to find. We thought we'd find something completely amazing, but anyway, that's research for you. And the last one I wanted to touch on, during that project, we also looked at the spread of leaf roll virus in vineyards. A leaf roll virus is a virus disease that is transmitted to vines by mealybugs, and it's quite debilitating, particularly on red wine or fruit of red varieties, where it reduces quality and yield. The mealybugs spread by sucking sap from one vine, transferring it to another vine. We monitored that for 3 years as well. One of the surprising things we found in there was that where we hadn't sprayed out the ground cover, the mealybugs resided on the ground in the clover and other weed species, and were not on the vines, so therefore didn't transmit the mealybug, the virus, to that vine. So all the organic vineyards had much less spread of leaf roll than all the ones that were using chemistry, and some of them were spraying for those mealybugs 2 to 3 times a year. Last slide. So thank you very much. Kelly's probably a wine lover as well, actually. Thank you.
Oh, that was awesome, Nick. Thank you so much. And also, I want to mention, because Jason said in his speech today that he was brought up by someone who really instilled in him the value of humility, and I think Nick's a pretty humble guy, so he provided his own bio, and he omitted to mention that this year he's been made a fellow of New Zealand wine growers, which they only do for those who've made outstanding contributions to the industry, and in his case it's for services to research, so really well done. It's just awesome stuff you're able to do there and share that wisdom through the industry and get more sustainable practices in place. Okay, so I'm delighted to welcome Nathan Matamua next, and Nathan's going to be speaking to us about human wellbeing. You'll also see Ellie's name on the program. She is going to be, so Dr. Ellie Britton is a clinical psychologist here on Massey's Pukeahu campus, and she is going to support Nathan with the workshop to follow. And in terms of Nathan, he has completed his Masters in Psychology at Massey, working on a project, and he's worked on a project on kokorangi Māori astronomical law and wellbeing. And that was for a science challenge project, but he carried that through with his master's research, which he's going to reflect on a little bit, I think, in his kōrero with us today. He has been born and raised in Levin, but he's whakapapa is Tūhoi, and prior to being a student, he was a supply chain manager for a global company, but decided that he'd had a good career but wanted to spend more time focused on family. And then he's really got into this research side of things and reconnecting with his identity. So I'm really delighted to welcome Nathan. Thank you so much for being willing to do this today.
Kia ora, Regina. Thank you for that introduction. Sorry, no pretty pictures today. But yeah, I was just here to talk about, what this could possibly look like when we ask nature this question. And, nature's good for us. Experience it, being in it, being part of it, seeing it, feeling it, touching it, makes us feel good. It makes me feel good. And there's heaps of research out there that supports this link between nature and feeling good, nature and well-being. But well-being is a really sort of complex thing. It has heaps of measurables to it from what I can see, things like the economy and housing or the environment. But I think there's this large subjective element to well-being as well. And I think this is one of the value of Indigenous knowledge, is that it taps into all of these things, I believe, especially mātauranga Māori. And I think that offers some insight. There's some insight there between nature and a human connection. And I think from that we gain access to some potential to explore how we can understand those connections to bring about ongoing and sustainable well-being for us all. So, today I wanted to share with you some of my experiences and learnings from my research journey, which was exploring Tūhoi astronomical knowledge in relation to the localised environmental management of water. And I did, just for some context, this research was with my own community, my own tribal community back home in Ruatahuna, in the heart of the Uruwera. And the idea really, or the question was, or what I wanted to do was grab some Tūhoi astronomical people with knowledge and some localised Tūhoi environmental experts and bring them together and talk about water management and just see what happened, what came out and what I found. So just to jump straight into it really, because there's not a heck of a lot of time and I'm probably not going to be able to cover everything, but the first real finding from the research was that discussing any phenomena incorporated the all-inclusive realities of the participants. And so what I'm saying here is that when we went away to talk about the stars and how they might relate to water, we had to talk about everything else. And so I came up to our wānanga back home. I travelled back home with my little interview sheet, and I had it all sort of thought, yeah, that's a good open question there. And here I was thinking I was going to get this massive upload of knowledge about the stars and water. But what I got was half an hour of what was happening in the community. Issues about certain kaupapa that were going on, talking about historical events and the impact they've had today. And really, the heart of that kōrero, or the heart of that finding, was really centred around human well-being. They wanted to understand where they were at that point in time, what things had happened in the past, so they could start projecting into the future what they wanted to do. And so one of the interesting kōrero that came out of that, when we eventually got to talking about stars and water, they said, look, Nathan, there's nothing wrong with the connection between the stars and water. It's always been there, it's always been the same since the beginning of time. The stars and the water on earth, they know each other really well. He says, it's just people. We're the problem. We've forgotten. And so they're saying, so for our community here, our aspiration is that we work hard to bridge that gap. And that was the focus. And so that led us to our next finding, which was a huge emphasis throughout our wānanga kōrero, was an emphasis on the quality of relationships. And quality of relationships with nature, but the emphasis of this relationships wasn't about connecting and talking about who we are, was about the idea of having experiences in nature, being able to go to your awa and be there, be present in person, watch it, see it, hear it, touch it, feel it, and see it transition through phases. It was important to them because there was an authority attached to knowing something. Somebody couldn't tell you about your river if you were living on it and you saw it change with the seasons. And something really important about this type of relationship through experiencing and touching from the participants was that it gave access to Māori. And that Māori was really important because they saw that if people were engaging with the environment, they could begin to sense the Māori or the energy of a place or an object. So if we went to the river and we spent enough time with it, we could start to sense its Māori. And the importance of Māori, according to my whanaunga, is that Māori gives us access to what the environment's telling us. So if we want to ask the environment a question, if we're like, well, how do we care for ourselves, environment or nature? That was one way we could do it, accessing Māori, and that was important. So they wanted to build relationships so they could gain access, so people could gain access to Māori. And something really interesting about Māori, and I think that's relevant for the provocations that we have today, about caring for human well-being and let's ask nature, is that that's not a crazy thing for us. Actually, asking nature is exactly what my tūpuna, my whanaunga, not what they would do, what they are doing. You know, they're turning to the environment to see what's happening. And the interesting thing that they said is that they already have ways of doing it in place. So we say, oh, how do we do this? So he says, well, we've got this thing that's called the whare wānanga, and it's an institution of learning. And in order to get discourse about something, what we did is that we went out to the river, and we sat by the river, and we got discourse from the river. And that was the purpose, and that was about not just asking, it was about being present. It was about feeling, it was about listening, it was about hearing. And that's an important thing too, this idea of sensing Māori is something that has to originate from within. So it's necessarily a feeling attached not so much to our sensory observations, but maybe more arise from our internal being, our intuition, that enable us to see the environment in a way that, through what obviously most of you might know as tohu, a sign. We see something, it means something, we make meaning from it. So this was really important, and I thought to myself, so what would nature probably tell us? If it could tell us something. And it was really cool, what would nature say? And ironically, we had a conversation about it at this wānanga that I was at, we were talking about kaitiakitanga, and, what's that like? And one of the participants had a kōrero, gave me an example of what they believed it was. And yeah, they referred to the ngahere, and they said this: the ngahere is saying, please come here, please eat this bird, I'm giving this to you. Please take this tree and carve it. Please come here, please trample in me, please be in my realm, so I can tell you who I am, and you can carry that with you. And I think, that's a real powerful statement. I think the construction of tāne in the mind of my whanaunga here is that the environment wants to care for him. Tāne is going to house him with his wood. Tāne is going to clothe him. Tāne is going to feed him. Tāne is going to give him rongoa. Tāne is going to give him oxygen. And in return, all he wants us to do is carry his identity. He wants us to carry him inside us. We sing his praises and elevate him. I suppose, in a way, elevate him in our consciousness, because we are him. And if we see Tāne and he's well, so are we. There's one way of looking at it. Oh, sorry. As you can see, I only did 3 slides. I was maxed out. At 3. The final thing, because even though I was exploring stars, I haven't talked about much about them, but the potential value of creating narratives using astronomical knowledge. So this idea that we could take what we had of our local knowledge on the astronomy and the stars and how we could embed that in narratives. And the reason for this is that people weren't interested in academic literature. In fact, people don't have access, many people. And if you bring it out in facts, just doesn't go down. It's like ducks off a water's back. But we know that if we encompass knowledge within narratives, we can hold them through generations. We know this with our own pūrākau. This works. And so they looked at this and they shared knowledge with me, and it was amazing knowledge. And I was like really humbled to hear this stuff. And they shared, they gave me an example, they said how this could look. But I won't give that example. I suppose we can talk about that in the workshop, but I probably think the best example of the power of astronomical knowledge is matariki. And I'm grateful that knowledge is a whānau knowledge for me. But what matariki has done is that it's elevated our consciousness of the environment. It's made us well in so many ways as a nation, as communities, as whānau. We celebrate together, we practice together, we have kai together, we look to the stars. And there are these narratives that a lot of people have become familiar with. And within these narratives, we have this national identity that we've created. It's something really unique to New Zealand now. But even within New Zealand, each tribe has their own way of doing it, their own mātauranga. Whānau have different ways of doing it, but we've been able to adapt and create. And so it sort of gets back to that notion we were talking about earlier today about it gives us a sense of unity in what we're doing. So, just to come back to the beginning, how can we care for human well-being? Let's ask the environment. Yeah, great. I actually think that's a great provocation, but I actually think when we get to the point where we are actually asking the environment, then we're actually taking a psychological step towards actually acknowledging that we're not alone, that we're not so self-absorbed as humans in ourselves. We're actually acknowledging that we have a tuakana, something older than us out there that's been wanting to care for us all this time. So I'll leave it there. That's enough for today. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Nathan, that was awesome. Lovely way to bring that together. I love that quote about the birds and the ngāhere too, and what we can learn there. So we're moving into workshop phase now, so the live stream's going to stop, and we are going to be having a bit of fun across some different spaces. The only tricky thing for you guys is to suss out which 2 topics would you most like to engage on, and you don't get to do pick and mix exactly. You get to choose either to look at the 2 topics, human wellbeing that Nathan's spoken to you about, and moving around sustainably, which Kirsty's spoken to you about, or the sustainable economies topic, which has been introduced to you beautifully by Sally, or the viticulture topic of Nick's. So basically they're going to be working in different spaces. The reason you can choose 2 is that the facilitators will work with one group for about 30 minutes and then they'll move to the other group for 30 minutes. And don't worry, we'll guide you to the spaces. The most important thing is, though, to either get a piece of paper that says sustainable economies and viticulture, or that says human wellbeing and moving around sustainably. And we've got limited numbers of each to ensure we have relatively even numbers in the groups. Maybe actually, so Sophie's helping out here, and maybe Kenshi you can as well. So we just need 2 people doing this. Sophie's got a sustainable economies and viticulture.